And we're going to call this Montpelier-Roxbury Public School Board meeting to order. First on the agenda is public comment. Do we have any members of the public in person who would like to comment? Online who would like to comment? No public comments this evening?
What do we know about online? Over there? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, okay. I just want to make sure we give this public comment space it's due. Any board members have any questions, concerns related to public comment, or can we move forward? All right. So our chivalrous chair is here.
Yes.
Jim, we started just to keep things moving along. Consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'd like to move that we approve it. Can we take out the minutes of the 8/18 meeting? I have a very minor edit.
Yes, so the motion is to approve the consent agenda without the 8/18 minutes so that we can discuss that. Do I have a second?
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those against? The ayes have it. All right, Jill, 8/18.
I was not here, but I was listed as present. I was having a really nice time, but I was not at the board meeting. That was all. Thank you. We can take that out. So do I make a motion to amend the minutes from 8/18 to reflect that edit? Okay. I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and then do we have a motion to approve those amended minutes?
I move to approve the amended minutes of the 8/18 school board meeting.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, Jim, I'm gonna pick it to you now.
Yeah, perfect. Again, sorry, I'm a little late.
Sorry.
Two things to add to the agenda. One, we're going to have a brief executive session prior to adjournment for the purposes of personnel. And then secondly, want to make an announcement. This should also be on the website and going out to students who have the families of students in Roxbury, both at RVS, also at the middle school and high school, which is unfortunately, Jerry Huck had to resign due to work obligations. We forgot to do this last time, but publicly thank Jerry for her service. She served very thoughtfully and very diligently on the board, and we really miss her, and leaves a big hole again, which we'll need to fill. So we are asking for Roxbury citizens, this is a Roxbury seat, to please, you can either write me or Libby, the emails are on the website, with your expression of interest, and then at the next meeting, we'll go through the letters of interest we have, give any potential candidates a chance to briefly introduce themselves to the board, and then at some point during that meeting, we'll go into executive session and make an appointment to fill out Jerry's term till the next election, and then that person or someone else will have to run for the remainder of Jerry's term, which I have to admit, I'm not sure how much she has left on her.
Some website you can find out.
I think she was coming up next. I think it was coming up next March or next election.
So she's finishing down her,
Yeah,
okay.
that's what I thought.
So you'd have to run anyways. So, yeah, so, and if you want any more information, please feel free to reach out to, I think, any of the board, but me in particular, I'm sure Libby would also be happy to chat with you about what service entails, and just ask any other or answer other questions you have.
Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt. Does that mean that there might be someone trying to participate or I don't know if maybe that's spam. Yeah. Hold on.
So what do we see?
It just says there's someone waiting in the waiting room for the Zoom call.
Yeah, using a phone.
I'm texting Anna right now. Thank you.
Good catch.
How you doing? How you doing?
Good. Okay. So I think with that, we can move on to board discussion, which is budget priorities, routines, and timelines. And also after that, RFP for district visioning work. But Grant, take it away, please.
Before Grant starts, Anna says there must be a lag between what she's
Okay.
doing at home and what you see on the screen. So
Okay.
just know that she's on it.
I think I'm on that quick question.
Yes.
Is there a way for us, like, with the Front Porch Forum and
Oh,
like, over
absolutely.
there and all
Yeah,
that stuff? that
Definitely. Yeah,
Happen, like, is there like a local paper over there? Or something?
I don't know. I think Kristen is already going to put it on Roxbury's Front Porch Forum. But yeah, no, any other social media you have that or kind of informal networks you have, definitely put out word as broadly as possible. Grant? Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, we just started the 21-22 school year and it feels a little strange, but we're going to start talking about the 22-23 budget. Before I get started, I did want to introduce Christina Kimball right behind me. Christina was the business manager for Washington Northwest and then most recently Caledonia Central. She is now ours. She works as the payroll manager and is also acting as the assistant business manager. And she's making sure that she knows all the processes. Since this is my last year, we want to make sure somebody knows how we run budgets, how we run audits, all those things. So it's to be a smooth transition. You should have all received a 3-page budget discussion document, and that's what I'm going to run through tonight. And at the end, there'll be plenty of time for questions or discussion. The document begins by outlining the budget process. We're at the beginning stages right now. We built a calendar over the summer, and this is our meeting tonight to provide some information to you and get some feedback and or guidance. The most significant, or the first, I should say, the first significant data point that we get for the budget process is our October 1 student count, which I will use to develop an enrollment projection. That enrollment projection comes in handy when we start talking about staffing levels. The enrollment projection and budget worksheets are going to go out to the principals and other administrators in early October. Principals will work with their staff to develop budgets, and they will also provide input to other administrators for other kinds of requirements. For example, if they have facility issues, they will contact Andrew LaRosa. If there's special education needs, they'll go to Bill Dice. If there are tech needs, they will talk to Mike Berry, although Mike is going to be pulling some double or triple duty this year since he is acting as the middle school principal. The leadership team is going to meet several times to go over the staffing requirements and budgets. And eventually the idea is that we come to a consensus before we bring a budget to you in December. To meet statutory deadlines, the board has to approve the budget by mid-January. We will present the budget one final time during the informational hearing, which is the day before town meeting, so February 28th this year, and then town meeting day, which is March 1st, is when the communities will vote. The next thing on this document is statewide factors. And as you know, from the last time we went through a budget, some of these statewide factors actually have a larger impact on the budget than our increase or decrease in budgeted numbers. For example, a change of $100,000 in the budget is about a penny on the tax rate. But a change of $100 on the dollar yield is a change of 1.5 in tax rate. A change of 10 students, an increase or decrease of 10 students is a penny and a half on the tax rate. And a change of 2% on the common level of appraisal is a change of 4 cents on the tax rate. So in all of those examples, everything resulted in a higher tax rate change than $100,000 in budget. So it's important to kind of understand these different factors, and I will go through all of them in a second. I did want to start out, though, with an opening paragraph on COVID-19 and federal funding, which have obviously had major impacts over the past few years and will continue to have impacts in the future. I think ESSER 3 funds will be available all the way through, I think, September 30th, 2024. So at least that long. We've already received about $800,000 in federal funds via coronavirus relief funds, which I'll be referring to as CRF, and also in elementary and secondary schools emergency relief, or ESSER funds. We anticipate much more ESSER funding, as well as federal special education funds and possibly federal infrastructure money. So we'll see how that goes. We are using some of the ESSER money to fund 3 math interventionists and a community liaison. That you're going to see probably as part of the FY23 budget. We're also paying for some additional ventilation work and professional development, but there's still a significant amount of money that's left to spend. And we will have to determine the best use of that money, and at the same time, be careful not to avoid a large revenue cliff. Because if revenues drop, it's the same impact to tax rates as if expenses are increasing. So just something to keep in mind.
Is there any way for us to be able to project those documents to the viewers at home and on Orca while you're speaking, just to follow along? Thank you.
And when that comes up, we're still on page 1. The first statewide factor that I wanted to talk about is the dollar yield. And that is the factor that is used as a comparison point to our spending per pupil. So if both the dollar yield and our spending per pupil increase by the same percentage, then the tax rate would remain level, or at least the pre-CLA tax rate would remain level. Sorry, I have to always look at you when I say CLA. Unfortunately, we won't hear anything regarding the dollar yield until December 1st is when the tax commissioner puts out a recommendation. And even more unfortunate is we won't get a final dollar yield set by law until after town meeting day. So we always end up getting a budget passed before we even know what the real tax rate is going to be. The influx of federal funds, and as Andrew will affirm, increases in sales and use and meals and rooms taxes might reduce the burden on property taxes. So we're actually hoping the yield will increase a little bit. So if the yield increases, then our spending per pupil can increase a little bit without impacting the tax rate. We're going to start by assuming a yield probably of $11,500, which is about $200 more than FY22. Equalized pupils is the next factor. That's a 2-year average student count that's adjusted by factors such as our free and reduced population, our English language learner population, the number of kids that are in preschool, the number of kids that are in high school. It's a very complicated formula. That formula may change soon, but as far as I know, it's still the same old formula that will be in play. Before COVID hit, as you know, our enrollment was on the increase. Due to COVID and its impact on attendance, we're assuming there's going to probably be some kind of a hold harmless provision statewide so that districts won't see this big drop in equalized pupils. Because if you have a big drop in equalized pupils, you have a big spike in tax rates. It's going to be more important to other districts than us because we have pretty good enrollment. But even our district could have a decrease because we had a lot of pre-K kids that didn't go to pre-K last year. Lower kindergarten enrollment. The number of pre-K kids that we typically pay tuition for is about 100. This past year, I think it was like 58. So that will reduce our count. But if there's some kind of a hold harmless provision, then what we might do is we might just see that everybody gets to keep the same number. If it goes up, maybe we'll be able to keep the higher number, or if it goes down, you may be held level. we're going to assume that we're going to hold level. So that's what we'll start with until we see some real numbers. Common level of appraisal, or CLA. Ooh, I always struggle on this one. So basically that is a factor to adjust your property value. And it's the real value of your property versus the assessed value. It's based on a 3-year average of sales data, and that sometimes helps avoid large swings. What happens is if home values are going up like they are now, the CLA goes down and the tax rate goes up. So hopefully I've written that so you can cheat and look at it again later, because it's not intuitive. We're going to begin the budget process by assuming that the CLA is going to drop about 2% in both communities. Although we are hearing that it could be a more dramatic drop, because sales, since it's 3 years, usually you don't see a dramatic change, but the sales prices are so high that it might actually be dramatic, even though it's 3 years. But we'll start with the 2% and we'll see how that plays out. That is probably the biggest tax factor, because that 2% is probably a 4-cent tax increase if it goes down. If it's more than that, it could be even more dramatic. And I will also say that last year, I'm not really sure what the dynamic was, but Roxbury's CLA went up, I think 4.5%, which was unexpected. So that good swing for the tax rate last year or this current year for Roxbury could be really bad next year, depending on what happens. I will say that I've heard both communities are going to have a reappraisal soon. I know for sure that Montpelier is, but I've also heard that Roxbury might. When the reappraisal happens, basically your appraised value and your real value are the same. So the CLA is 100%, and there is no change in the tax rate when that happens. So typically when you get a reappraisal, the CLA is going up and your tax rate goes down. But your real tax amount that you pay is pretty much the same, because it's a lower rate attached to a higher number for property value. But the rates actually go down whenever a reappraisal happens. The next one is Act 46. For those of you who were here when we merged, whenever we merged, Act 46 allowed us to get a tax incentive, and that tax incentive was an 8-cent reduction to the tax rate. Every year that dropped by 2 cents. Unfortunately, the way you could look at it is after year 1, we've seen a 2-cent increase every year. I mean, that's really what you're having to deal with. This year for FY23, that's the final year of, or actually it's the first year that we're not going to have any kind of incentive. So we had a 2-cent incentive in FY22. There's no incentive in FY23. So this is the last year where we kind of see that, in a way, 2-cent increase. After this year, it'll be flat. Let's see. I do mention, I think in here, that the impact of that 2 cents, maybe I don't mention it. In order to kind of offset that 2 cents, you basically need to cut your budget by about $250,000. Cut the budget or increase your revenues, like your fund balance revenue. Let's see, where are we at now? Health rates. For the past couple of years, the health rates have gone up about 10% on average. I'll assume the premiums go up another 10% this year, but I really don't know. I don't know how to, obviously COVID-related expenses are high, but as we talked about at the finance committee, folks who would typically go to the doctor for routine issues are not going. So that may offset some of those other higher expenses. So we just don't know. We will get something from the Vermont Education Health Initiative, VHI, that's who we get our health insurance from. We'll get a number from them in November, which is usually a pretty good guess. So by the time we have our first budget presentation, we should have a pretty good number in there for health premiums. Statewide healthcare bargaining is happening right now. The current settlement runs through December of 2022, which is half of FY '23. I don't think we're going to see anything come out from the bargaining that's going to impact us dramatically. We're pretty much aligned, and I think it's a pretty generous healthcare package for the state that we have now. So I can't imagine there's going to be a big swing. In addition to that, it's only going to be for 6 months of the fiscal year. So I don't think there's going to be a huge impact because of statewide healthcare bargaining. And the last thing on the list for statewide factors is Act 173. We've been talking about this for a while. That changes the special ed funding formula from basically a reimbursement model where we incur an expense and we get about 56% reimbursed back to us. It changes that model to more of a block grant where we get X number of dollars per student. That was supposed to be in effect, I think, definitely in FY '22, maybe even in FY '21. I'm hearing that it is supposed to be in effect for FY '23, but I'm not 100% on that because I haven't heard for sure that it's happened. And I also haven't heard the details of what that model looks like. Like, for example, how do you define a kid? Is it going to be an equalized pupil? Is it going to be an average daily membership? Is it going to be a student count for special needs? I'm not sure. And I don't know what the dollar amount is going to be. So I'm just putting it on here because it could impact our revenues. So we could see, and for us, it would probably be a decrease. It would be an increase in certain areas like probably Burlington, Winooski, but for us, it would probably be a decrease in special ed revenues. That's the bad news. The good news is it allows us a lot more flexibility in how we spend special ed money. The other good news is that we have been working to change, to align our systems to increase effectiveness when kids need additional support. So we've known this is coming. We've been trying to posture for it. Okay, moving on. So those are statewide issues. Now I'm going to get into kind of our district-wide pressures and opportunities, things that we know locally are going to be an issue. Salaries are always a pressure because they make up a high percentage of the budget. So even a routine salary increase or pay raise is going to be a pretty large increase in terms of dollars. I will tell you that a lot of times in the budget process, we're having to assume a salary increase. We don't need to do that this year because our collective bargaining agreements are in place for all bargaining units through FY '23. Staffing levels obviously impact salaries and benefits. Enrollment projections will help us kind of determine whether we should be looking at classroom staffing at all. The high school might need a minor increase if the trends continue like they were last year. The middle school has one grade cohort that is a challenge. It's been real borderline as far as class sizes go. Other staffing needs beyond classroom teachers will be discussed by the leadership team. If there's any kind of custodial issues or paraeducator issues, we'll talk about those things as a leadership team and bring those forward. Special education, that budget is going to be based on requirements that we identify as part of the service plan. That service plan is due October 15th. But I will tell you, I spoke with Bill Dice, and he has had an uptick in special ed evaluation requests. So those could end up driving additional requirements in special ed for the coming year. Technology is on here as a pressure, which kind of goes against logic a little bit. I'm sure that we spent a lot of federal funds on buying student devices. So you might initially think, well, we'll probably see a drop in needs for hardware. It doesn't quite work that way because if you have a whole bunch of devices, you also are going to have a whole bunch of devices that are getting dropped that you're going to have to replace on a routine basis. I don't think in FY '23 we'll see that big increase because they're so new. But there might be a little bit of an uptick there. I think though hardware is probably something that you're going to see in future years that might have an uptick. The last pressure that I list is food service. COVID-19, I've talked about it before during quarterly reports. It's contributed to a larger than average food service deficit. This year we budgeted, in FY '22, we budgeted a transfer of 100,000. Over the past 2 years, the average deficit has been more like 170. So it might make sense to bump that up a little bit. On the flip side of that, though, I certainly hope that by FY '23, we're back to kind of normal food service operations and that we see the benefit of higher quality food with increased participation. And hopefully, we'll see some improvement in the deficit numbers. I will say that in the near term, we have seen an even bigger increase in food service because we had to increase the hourly rate. We bumped it up to $15 an hour because we are having a real challenging time finding food service workers. So something that I'll think about a little bit and then bring to you as a proposal, whether we need to bump this up any higher than 100,000. On the opportunity side, we may be able to reduce some assumptions on the salary and benefit side because we've been coming in under budget. The fourth quarter report that you saw shows that we under executed again, salaries and benefits. What I can do in the FY '23 budget maybe is to make some different assumptions, like assume that if we have a vacancy for a teacher, assume they're going to be a lower on the salary schedule. Assume that maybe they're only going to have single health coverage, because right now they're pretty much on the higher end, and I'm assuming 2-person coverage. Somebody could come in right from college, not needing health insurance, and that's a big swing. So I could make those assumptions. I could also reduce the assumption for how much we're going to use, how much the employees will use their health reimbursement arrangement. This past year, the HRA use was really low because, as I mentioned, unless you were really sick, a lot of people weren't taking the chance of going to the doctor. So we'll see how that plays out, but we could bump it down a little bit next year to see if we can save some money there. I mentioned staffing as a pressure, but it could be an opportunity as well, depending on how the staffing projections look. We know that UES is getting to a point where their class sizes could be too small. I know that sounds strange to say, but there is an optimal class size for instruction. But we'll have to see how that plays out. If it's not obvious, bless you. If it's not obvious, then we wouldn't be looking to make a reduction. But if it is obvious, and if we think that it's actually bad for instruction, we might be looking at reductions. RVS class sizes are low. It's not really an opportunity or a pressure probably because I don't think we can do anything about it because the number of kids, the total number of kids is just too small. Even with multi-age classrooms, there's just so much you can do. Let's see what else we got. Tuition, high school tuition. We budgeted $53,000 this year. That related to Roxbury kids who were grandparented with high school choice. That grandparented status goes away after this year. So that 53,000 we budgeted this year goes to 0 next year. So at least we know there's 53,000 that we're going to see as a savings. And the last opportunity I list is fund balance. We've had a very healthy fund balance. That healthy fund balance has got healthier, I guess that's a word. Because in FY '21, we finished with a surplus again. A lot of that has to do with just the federal funding, the COVID impacts. It's hard to see how things were going to play out. For example, and I mentioned this example to the finance committee, it looked like we had overspent $265,000 in hardware, which was deficit spending, I thought. But we actually received $415,000 in federal funds that paid for that. So really, instead of a deficit of 265, we actually came out ahead by 150 because we thought we were going to use local funds and we didn't have to because we had the federal funds. So those kinds of weird swings. In addition, like projects, facility projects, it looked like we were overspending, but that overspending related to the ventilation work, which we got fully funded. And we actually, out of local funds, spent a little less than we anticipated for facility projects. So there were a lot of moving parts. If you want to get deeper into that, the fourth quarter financial report was included in your board packet. So you can look at that. If you still have questions, feel free to pass them along. Fund balance is always on here as an opportunity because taxes are based on education spending, not total spending. What that means is you have your total spending, you subtract out non-tax revenues to get education spending. So if fund balance, for example, is a non-tax revenue, if you have more fund balance revenue as a source, then that reduces your education spending, just like cutting your expense side. So anytime that you have fund balance, it's a potential opportunity because you could bump up fund balance revenue in your budget. That's the good news. The bad news is if you do that and you can't afford to do it in the next year, you have this revenue cliff that you fall off of and the tax rate goes way up in the following year. So you have to be real thoughtful how you spend fund balance. Right now, we're assuming probably 400,000 because that's how much we have this year, but we can tweak that. We can use it as a lever to help control tax rates. And I think I've talked quite enough for now. There is another section talking about proposed guidance, but before we get to that, I thought I would open it up to any questions that anybody has to this point.
Thank you, Grant. This is super helpful. Questions for Grant?
I have a few, just clarifications, confusion. So when you get all these revenues, then that's not good, even if, you know, like, for example, the COVID, or if you apply for a grant outside of that, you were saying that the dollar yield increases. What was that? That you
No.
said that sometimes it's not good if your revenue increases so much. Where is the?
No, I'm always in favor of a lot of revenue. That's a good thing.
Yes, but
What's the downside is
yes.
if you use revenue for like a recurring requirement, like say my salary. Say this year we got a bunch of federal money and you decided to use that to pay for my salary. Well, next year when that revenue goes away, unless I go away, then you've dropped revenue, but you still have the expense. So that's the problem with revenues. It's not when you get them, it's making sure that when you get them, you spend them in a way that it's not going to create a problem later.
And there's nothing related to the dollar yield. Did I just take my notes wrong?
The dollar yield, I think,
Increase of revenue.
I think if there's additional revenue statewide, as long as it's helping to offset or relieve some pressure on the education fund, that's a good thing.
Okay.
That would allow the dollar yield to go up, which I know like CLA, you want it to go, well, you want CLA to go up, you want the dollar yield to go up too, because in both of those cases, that means taxes go down. So revenue, as long as it's used for the right reasons and it helps to take off some pressure, then it's a good thing. And it would make our dollar yield go up, which means our spending can go up per pupil. And as long as those are both going the same direction at the same rate, then the tax rate stays the same.
That's what I was, thank you for that.
It's so easy.
So easy.
No, it wasn't, but I can ask a question. I have a question.
Don't feel pressure.
So you talked about Act 173 and how that's used for special ed. And I was looking at the Q4 financial report, and it looks like the ed spending was about 3.7. The budgeted special ed education spending was 3.7. million? Is
Yeah,
that
which, can you remind me which one that was, that intensive or was it extraordinary?
in the quarterly report? It's just one line, special education, and that's it.
Oh, for expenses.
For expenses,
Oh,
sorry,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. So 3.7 is what we are spending on special education. Acts 173 brings in revenue against that, is that right?
So. Yeah, Act 173 would be state special ed funding for us to cover requirements. We're already getting it. It's just a different model. So right now, some things will change and some won't. For example, if we have state placed students, we're going to get 100% reimbursement. I think under the new model, we still will get 100% for state placed expenses. For extraordinary costs, I think under the new model, we'll still get a higher percentage of reimbursement for extraordinary costs, like over $60,000. But most of the money we get is called intensive. And what that means is if you have a special ed teacher, that cost might be $100,000 with salary and benefits and everything else, right? Just to make it an easy number. We would submit that as an expense and the AOE would give us about 56% or $56,000 against that expense. The new model isn't going to base it on reimbursement. They're not going to look at how much we're spending and give us a percentage of it. They're going to just say, you have 100 kids, we're going to give you $1,000 per kid. So here you go. And then we don't have to track the expenses and submit for reimbursement. We have that money, we can use it how we feel is best serving students. And so there's a lot more flexibility. The issue for us as Montpelier-Roxbury is I think because of our demographics, we're probably going to see a reduction in how much money we're actually getting in special ed reimbursement. I hate to use the phrase winners and losers, but every time there's a change in law, there are people who come out better and people who come out worse. I think this one is probably going to mean that we're going to see a little less revenues in special ed.
Yeah, I was looking at those. So I was looking at the expenditure was 3.7. The special ed from the revenue side, the intensive was about 1.5. The extraordinary is about 400, and then the state place is about 18,000. So I was trying to add those up and see where how much is it that we're getting reimbursed. And that's the portion that's going to potentially go down is what you're saying, right? So I was trying to get those.
Right. When you look at all those revenue sources, like the state placed, take that off the table, and extraordinary, take that off the table, because I think those will be the same. I think what's going to be different is instead of a block grant and an intensive reimbursement, we're just going to have one that's going to be like a block grant. And I think the total dollar amount is probably going to be a little less.
Okay.
I mean, we actually probably would have made out this past year because we would have got X number of dollars that we could have used however we wanted. And so whenever we went into this pod model and we had a lot of special ed personnel doing general ed work, we wouldn't have had to worry about shifting those costs and then getting less reimbursement. We would have just got the number that we got. But it'll be interesting how it works. We'll have to see.
My question sort of is related, and I get the sense that I'm going to need an education on how special education funding works in the state of Vermont or federally. But so when you talked about there is a potential increase in the number of students who will be identified as needing special education services, and that could increase our budget. I'm wondering, is there like so I think this is kind of what you were answering with Aniket, but is there a flat amount that we are reimbursed for those expenditures, or how does it work?
Yeah, well, the good news is we may all need that tutorial because I think it's going to change. But right now, the way it works is everybody gets what's called a special ed block grant, which is like for us last year, it was like $400 and some odd thousand. So everybody gets a flat dollar amount just to cover expenses.
Is that based on how many students are in the district?
It's based on things like the number of kids, and also average salaries gets factored in. It's a formula that's done by AOE. So we get this flat grant called a block grant. The next piece is called an intensive reimbursement, which is, and the percentage changes every year, but it's roughly 56%. So throughout the year, I submit reports to the Agency of Education and I show them how much money we've spent on special ed.
Mhm.
And they give me basically 56% of that money back as a reimbursement. The other two pots are state
56, sorry, or 60.
56% about.
56. Okay, thanks.
The third pot is state placed. So if we have special education costs for state placed students, we report that and we get 100% reimbursement for that. I think that is going to be the same for the new model. I don't think they're going to change that piece. And then the last piece is called extraordinary expense. So if we have a student who's in a placement and by the end of the year, the total cost is say $100,000. From $0 to $60,000, we're getting reimbursed 56%. Once that student hits $60,000, we get 95% reimbursement from that dollar amount up.
Mhm.
That, I think, is going to be similar. I think there's still going to be a way for us to get a higher level of reimbursement for extraordinarily expensive students. But those first two, the block grant and the intensive reimbursement, those two, I think, are going to be combined into one kind of block grant instead of two different pots. And it'll be X number of dollars times X number of kids. And I just don't know what those two X's are.
And what, can you explain what state placed means?
Sure, if like say a kiddo's in DCF custody and they are serviced by us as the LEA, then that would be a state placed student. There can also be, trying to think of it, there's a facility, I think, that's in the bounds of Montpelier that, what's that?
Onion River.
Onion River. So some kids get placed there, and because they're placed there in our area, and if we provide services, then all of the expenses that we incur get reimbursed.
Okay.
If-
thank you.
If it's a special education student. If the student is just is not on an IEP of any sort, then we may not get reimbursed for that.
And are we also reimbursed at these same rates for 504 students?
There's no reimbursement for 504.
Okay.
I have a question on the dollar yield. One of the things that you have on page 1 in your notes was we begin the budget process assuming the yield will increase about $200, and then in parentheses, you've written 11,500. Can you say a little bit more about why 200 means 11,500?
Because this year, the dollar yield was about 11,300 for FY22.
Oh, okay.
So I'm
So that's-
saying
it'll go
probably
up to
$200, which would put it at about 11,000.
Got it. So it's not exactly a translation of a very intense calculation. It's more
no.
just, we're adding $200
Right.
to what it was this year. Thank you.
Right. And that, like I said, the tax commissioner will come out with a recommendation that it always comes out pretty much right on December 1st. Sometimes it's a day or two later before I get it, but early in the budget process, whenever we're presenting budgets, we'll have a pretty good number. And then we have an inside person who sometimes can give us some tips on if we should make adjustments to that assumption. Not naming any names.
I just had a real quick question. Amanda's question prompted this and Mia's too, and I should know the answer. But are these revenues that we've gotten, these ESSER money and the CRF money, are they counted towards our per pupil spending? So for instance, are districts getting dinged because their per pupil spending went up a whole bunch this year? Like versus the yield?
Good
Or-
question. That is a very good question. Actually, the answer is we don't get dinged for it.
Okay.
Because remember I mentioned before that a lot of times I put things in terms of education spending because it doesn't matter what your total budget's doing because you could have revenues that are offsetting a lot of that. So really it's the education spending that counts. And our spending per pupil is education spending per equalized pupil.
Okay.
And so that spending that we're having with federal money is also,
something like that ahead. And is that gonna impact our next budget cycle? Because they're planning to finish this study or whatever soon, right? And
yeah, I think it's
But we
been,
don't know what they're doing, if they're doing it in a rolling fashion,
mhm,
or if they're doing it, they do it all at once, or like those things matter. So
mhm,
because we have no indication of what they're gonna do, Manchester will do a rolling, because
mhm.
it'll hurt so much, but we don't know what they're gonna do, so it's hard to plan for it.
yeah, I would agree. And I think it's a lot like the 6-semester average for tech tuition. I can't imagine that they're gonna say, this is the new process and we recalculated it. So next year you lose 100 kids. I think it will be something that somehow gets averaged in over time. I mean, it will hurt, even if it's just 10 kids. I
Mhm.
mean, they may say, oh, we're only gonna, maybe there'll be a hold harmless provision where they say nobody's gonna drop more. In statute right now, there's a hold harmless of 3.5%. Nobody can drop by more than 3.5% for equalized pupils. But even 3.5% is a pretty big number and would have a pretty big tax implication. I don't think that we can plan for it necessarily, but I think during the year where it happens, there's going to have to be some serious thought about, can we reduce some expenses to try to figure this out? Can we, do we still have fund balance as a lever to try to use? Are there other revenues we can try to bring in to offset this? I mean, it may just be a kind of a new standard that we're going to have to set is, because of this, we're going to have to figure out a way to reduce education spending by so much in order to come to this new level, this new equilibrium. And I hate using that term as winners and losers. Really, there's going to be people that gain and people that subtract in a number. It's probably, as a matter of fact, I know it's the right thing to do to recalculate this, because there are communities that really should have more spending available to them. It's just a bad way to say it, but I think our equalized pupil count is probably going to drop and others will go up,
I appreciate that.
but not this. I don't think it'll happen this year. I don't think we have to deal with it.
I mean, could the plan be somewhat analogous to what we've had to do with Act 46, of just knowing that we've got this kind of graduated,
Yeah, I mean,
essentially increase?
the good thing about Act 46 is, when we did this, the first year, when we got that 8-cent tax increase or tax rate reduction,
It was
we
lovely.
spent a lot of money on one-time costs.
Yeah.
And that way we knew we could just take it out of the budget every year. But that was like staying at this level, in a way. And now this is going to be having to really reduce. So we can't like increase expenses that we can strip away. We're going to have to really decrease expenses or increase revenues and come up with a new normal as far as spending goes. Hopefully it won't be as much of an impact as I think. And hopefully it does get averaged in over time where it's not going to be a huge impact. I can't imagine that they wouldn't do that though, because there would just be such outcry statewide, because there are so many districts that would lose equalized pupils. And it would drive a huge tax rate increase all over the place. So this year, I don't think we need to worry about it. And then next year, we'll see how much it has to be, but hopefully not dramatic.
One more question, which might be for Libby, might be for Grant, but when you talk, the state with the external factors like dollar yield, CLA, I'm curious how you take those into account when you're in your deliberation phase, when the leadership is all,
We don't in the beginning.
okay.
We go into the room with the magic walls that you can write on.
Yep.
And we brainstorm the heck out of what we would love to do and
Uh-huh.
love to see happen. And we don't pay any attention to that. And Grant sits and rubs his head a lot and gets all stressed out. And then from there, when the numbers start coming in, then we see how we need to prioritize.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we do eventually, but not in the beginning.
Yeah,
Got
and the board, a few years ago, and it kind of, especially when Libby came out, kind of gave instructions to start the budget process, that we're really thinking about what you need to meet the needs of the
Yeah.
kids and to meet the needs of the district without kind of coming in already saying, okay, we can't spend more than this, because then that automatically limits the thinking at the beginning stage. So.
Thanks.
And I'm going to go ahead and jump to the last piece of this because it kind of ties in. And then, I mean, we can still open it up to questions, but typically what happens is I will give the board something to chew on as far as guidance that you're going to give back to us to follow. I mean, instead of you just having to come up with something from scratch. And what you just asked is kind of part of this, because if, for example, CLA, I'm really concerned about CLA. So because of that, I chose a number of 3.5% as a goal on here as far as an increase in education spending. One, it's a goal. So every time I say something, Libby keeps reminding me, it's a goal, Grant. Stop rubbing your face. So, but it's a goal, but it also gives us something to kind of shoot for. And if the CLA was gonna, you know, if I thought CLA was gonna go up and tax rates were gonna go down, then I might say, well, you know, maybe you should ask us to try to limit it to 5%. But really what I'm trying to see is, what do I think might happen to tax rates? Because I try to maintain some kind of stable tax rates. And so that's why I chose 3.5% this year. I don't think it's really reasonable to think we could come in any lower than that, because most of our money is in salaries and benefits. We know what the salary increase is. We know health benefits are going to go up 10%, or health premiums. So it's very hard to come in any lower than that. But that's why I picked that number. But the guidance that I was proposing is that you could have us consider all the requirements that would improve student learning, obviously, because that's why we're here. Scrutinize staffing levels, since that's where most of the money is in the budget. And then prioritize requirements at the end to try to get a goal of about 3.5%. I will tell you that if there's a lot of stuff on that list that we think we really have to have, and we're at 4.5%, then we're going to come in with 4.5%. But we try to at least keep this as a sanity check in our head. Like, let's try. So that was the guidance. Now you could say, yes, that's the guidance we want you to operate under, or you could give me completely different guidance, or you could not give us any and we'll just, you know, do the best we can. But at this point, I would say if you want to give guidance, you can give guidance. If you have other questions, I'll be glad to answer. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. And let's try to wrap up in the next couple of minutes. Then we've got one more item, and then we're running a little behind, but go
I've
ahead.
got a small question. And I should know this, but can you tell me what the percentage increase was in the prior year?
Oh my goodness, I should know that too. Yeah, I really should. I
Last year?
Yeah,
don't know
that's
the
been-
percentage increase in education spending. I think it was actually under 3%.
I want to say 2.8. I think it's 2.8. I think it was 2.8 or 2.6.
Yeah, it was under 3%. I know that.
I know that's not that relevant, but I just wanted to know what it was. Okay, thank you.
So
I'm also going to offer up Grant that if you, he definitely can answer technical questions by email if you have them. Just like looking at something, oh my God, what is the CLA? Don't bombard him, but he definitely is. He knows his stuff, and the budget process is hard. Amanda?
Yeah, so I see a timeline, we're in September, and so you said December, you guys will bring the budget back to the board. January gets approved, and then in March gets voted by the community. So I know that last year there was like a few of us that are new. I know there's a new person that's gonna come in. So I'm wondering if we can plan to have like a training on the CLE. I know that Chloe did one in the State House, I think. That was really good. Is that Andrew? Chloe was the person that you mentioned?
Yeah, she used to work in the fiscal office. Montpelier resident.
So I was thinking like if we could plan to have one of those trainings, just I think it's really important for us to kind of before the vote in December to be able to just like really understand all the things, and then just like that training that's like on the CLA and also like the education funding. So that is like, gives us like 3 months before our December vote to be able to be informed as to, all the things.
I think that was recorded. I could see if I could find that recording, because I agree, that would be really helpful.
I think Jake's done some things too that
Mhm.
we could probably share.
Sort of piggybacking on that, I think it might be good to have like more of a general, maybe it's just like a 1 hour meeting, training for all of us on like, what is the board's role when it comes to the budget? And so Grant just said, you could offer guidance tonight. I don't feel prepared or equipped to know what would be appropriate at this juncture in terms of guidance, as an individual board member. So I think it would be cool to have a 1 hour sit down with the more veteran board members and maybe Grant as well, and Libby. Just to get a better understanding of what the board's role is in this whole process.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something we do.
One thing I'll offer as a resource, the podcast episode that Grant and Libby did at the beginning of this year, it was like the first one, I think. It was a really good primer on some of this vocabulary and stuff. So I'm gonna make a note to myself to re-listen to it, and it'd be good for any community member who's feeling like dollar yield, CLA, that was very helpful for me to listen to. So new board members and community members and returning board members, that's a good resource too.
So Greg, with that said, before the vote in March, I know that like you guys did that great podcast and it was awesome, but also like just for us to plan on translation and being able to like do the community sessions to ask questions. So if that happens in January, like, or like, does it have?
So January is around the middle of January is whenever the board has to say yes to take, this is the budget we're going to take to the voters. And the reason for the delay is because it has to go to the municipalities so that they can get the warnings in their annual reports, all that kind
I
of
see.
stuff. So once that's done, really, there's a window from January until, middle of January till the very beginning of March to do public outreach. And a lot of times, like, not so much last year because of COVID, but, in the past, we've served lunch at the senior center and, they've asked questions during a break and we've talked. Sometimes board members will go to the Rotary Club or something like that. There's different outreach that we can do to explain the budget or, just, I think we do that, right. And that's the window from the middle of January till town meeting day is really just the window to communicate and try to sell.
Yeah.
If you're trying to get input, then we should start now with ideas and priorities so that we can throw that in. A lot of times that bubbles up though, because it's parents that talk to principals and then principals put it in their budget. So a lot of times it happens organically, but this would be a good time to, talk to community members, find out what's going on, what they're thinking is priorities. This budget process, one of the wild cards is going to be all this federal funding, because we have to kind of figure out in the facility size, especially, what are we going to keep in the normal general fund for facilities? What are we going to put in the capital fund for, projects versus what might we decide we would spend infrastructure money on if and when it comes, or ESSER 3 money, or fund balance money. So that will be a little bit of a dynamic to figure out. But yeah, right now, if you're talking to people and you're hearing what they're thinking is important and can bring that through, especially, it works best if it goes through the schools.
Yeah.
Because then, a principal can hear that and then compare it to what they already are thinking about as far as priorities and then bring it forward. Yeah, I guess I'll just stop talking now.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, we usually get the first budget presentation, like the first meeting in December. Yeah, and then there's time really to change it until we approve it. So between really now and November is kind of the prime time to do outreach and and get priorities, get the ideas.
And as far as like board members trying to refresh their memory, do you still have that slide? There's a slide that we do, well, I'm sure you can't see it, but the tax rate calculation, it starts with total budget minus revenue, non-tax revenues equals. All the symbols are there that walk you through the math of it. I mean, you'll still have to refresh your memory on, CLA is on there. So what is CLA? I mean, yeah, I struggle with that every year, but at least that'll show you how the math works to build the tax rate. And that's half the battle, is figuring out how the math works on it. And seeing that, the answer to your question is education spending went up 2% last year. 2.8 was the total budget. So last year was a pretty good year.
So on your timeline for tonight's meeting, September 1st, it says for the school board to discuss the process and priorities and guidelines. Those are your and Libby's process priorities and guidelines, right? That's not like, none of that is supposed to come from the board.
Yeah, I think process is me explaining what the budget process is that we follow. And some of the stuff we can't do anything about, like middle of January, we have to have an approved budget. Priorities is, if there were anything that I knew of right now, I would have brought them up. I mean, I talked about some of the pressures and opportunities. As far as from your perspective, priorities was, if you already knew of any priorities, and if you did, great, you can bring them up now. If you didn't, this is my reminder to you that this is a good time to get input from people. If anybody out there is talking about priorities that want to come in,
Yeah.
the earlier, the better into the process. A lot of times, we're doing a presentation in January and somebody comes in and starts advocating for something that we didn't hear about until then, and it's really late to try to throw it in. So for the community to know that we're looking for priorities now that they can push forward, for you to know that if people come to you, that's something to make sure that we're hearing about, whether it's through the school or directly to us. So yeah, priorities, process, and then the other piece was the timeline that you got, and then guidance if you choose to give it. If not, then we'll just kind of proceed like we normally do, which is basically throwing everything that we know of
Yeah.
on the wall and then trying to figure out what we can afford.
And
So
so-
would that be something we can talk about in the next board meeting? Like
We're gonna
into
be talking
guidance?
about the budget
Yeah.
pretty much
At
every board
meeting.
meeting between now
Okay.
and the time we
Right.
approve it. It's a big part of our job. We're gonna have a lot of discussions and kind of continued information and opportunity for us to, give the priorities we're hearing from the community and for the administration to respond and for us to, again, give suggestions, give some priorities, et cetera.
Jim, sorry,
yeah.
over the course of the year, already we have heard several sort of asks from the community at these meetings. Not directly saying like, hey, when you're considering next year's budget, can you do this? But sort of like asking about like the track facilities, which I know we're thinking about for ESSER funding or whatever, the federal funds that are coming down from infrastructure. But we've also heard about like, was it a heat pump at Roxbury? And I've heard of several. And I'm just wondering if there's like a central place that we're sort of keeping all of that feedback that I could review just to see if there's anything that I feel is missed from these board meetings and the stuff that we've heard about.
The two that you mentioned I know about that we're trying to figure out. Well, actually, the heat pumps in Roxbury, I think, are a designated use of fund balance that's on the quarterly report. The track is a big one that we're trying to figure out. So which bucket makes the most sense? But as far as anything else that's come up, whether there's some kind of standing list, I don't,
The infrastructure presentation that we did in the last board meeting had the vast majority of them in it.
But some of the other like social emotional, like those other conversations around special ed, like just how when it comes to prioritization later, if we have like that feedback in one central place, just to see, like, can you tell us a little bit more about like, these were some of the concerns that parents had, like just something to think about that we can.
At a board level, Emma, do you want to do that?
Would I do that?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd be
I
happy
think
to try to do
having
that.
like one board member who like kind of keeps track of that makes sense.
Yeah,
Even if
because
it's not
I
you,
lose
if somebody
track,
else-
just my memory isn't
Yeah.
as good as it once was.
Yeah,
Just
no,
like
but
a
I
list of
think
Mine
it's,
has
I think it's a good
never
idea to keep track of this, because it's easy to for ideas to come up and then say, oh, that's a good idea, and then we move on to the next
Okay.
thing, so.
We would do like a few sessions where we just brainstorm about here's what we're hearing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Make it more.
I do want to move on because we are over time, but thank you, Grant. I know we'll hear from you plenty.
You'll be seeing plenty of me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Drive safe, guys.
RFP for district visioning work, is this you, or I know Mia was working on it, Mia?
We're just opening it up for any more feedback. Amanda shared some over email with us, so I made adjustments based on Amanda's feedback. And so the one that Libby sent, the version that Libby sent out on Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning is the most recent one,
Yeah.
one of those two. So this is really just the time for the board to take a look at it and say, you missed a period, or we actually don't think we need this, or what,
I have a question once I opened it up. I remember I had a question when I read it before. I'm just looking for it. I also,
And is that something we can share with the? people?
Yeah.
and maybe you decided not to do this so that it would be more open-ended, but I was just wondering, well, I guess I have a couple of questions. One is, did you consider any specific deliverables that we might want out of this? Like, there's high level, like, we want a cohesive vision of what an exceptional education within MRPS looks like, but like, do we want to receive that via a report? Do we want to like have some presentations?
Do you see the bulleted list on the bottom of the first page?
Let me go
A written summary of findings, qualitative data points.
on the bottom of the first page.
Yeah,
No, I don't see
Is
it.
We don't have the version that you have, maybe?
Yeah.
Oh, I think you are still showing the old one, Libby.
Maybe we have the old one, actually.
You might have the old one.
Yeah, I think we do have the old one.
Shoot.
Hold on.
If we have the old one and there's a new one with that type of
You
stuff.
got it in email. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's under docs. I can send you a link again if you want.
Where is it?
I just did a search in the docs,
Oh.
RFP, and that's the one that came up.
Oh, it wasn't the one in our packet.
No,
I
it
don't
was,
know, I
it
just
was
did
the
a-
second email.
I did a search on the Google Drive
Oh.
itself.
So right here, Andrew, you can see it up on the screen.
Yeah, that's. cool.
so good idea,
Yeah.
because
Yes.
Can you highlight the differences between the version that I've read and this version? Or are they like, are there too many? Is that not a good use of
The
time?
bulleted list is a highlight. There's some differences in the first two paragraphs. The flow of them is a little different, but they mostly say the same thing. Terms and conditions, there are no changes to projected schedule. There's no changes to, and then other big additions were Amanda had some great ideas for successful proposals. There's
there's
examples
more
of numbers 7 through 9 are new.
So let me ask this question. Would it make sense if we're running behind schedule? Would it make sense? Because it sounds like you didn't read that version either.
Yeah.
Would it make more sense to bring this up next time, or do we like really need to move on this tonight? And in which case we might want to take like 10 minutes to review it, but we're a little behind schedule. So
I think rather than wait until the next board meeting, because as you can see, we'd like submissions back by October 13th. And so I want to give people time enough to prepare their proposals.
Yeah.
If you don't want to take the time now because we are running behind, I would say read and send edits just straight to me, Jim, and Libby. And again, like we will just look at any themes that come from everybody's feedback and then we can just put it out there, because it's not something we actually have to vote on, is my understanding. It's just more like we're just getting.
Input, yeah. The email came from me in case you're looking for it on August 30th. It's called updated RFP for board meeting.
And is Kristen on?
Yeah.
Any questions?
Kristen?
No way.
She is. She just sent me a text.
Like waves crashing on her face.
Seriously.
I don't see.
Maybe she's muted.
Maybe she press *6.
maybe her.
She said I'm talking.
Oh,
Right?
maybe we need to like unmute her officially from our end. Do you want me to go to the computer and look at it?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Very,
Yeah.
very
Ah.
well.
Miraculous. Okay. Yes, I am on a boat out at sea, and I'm going to try to be succinct and brief. I had one question: is if there's a budget that's established, and if that would be mentioned here, so that a consultant might know how to frame their proposal. And then I was just curious if we had a budget. And then
Yeah.
If you put a budget in an
Best
RFP,
practice for RFPs.
it's what?
Best practice for RFPs. You can't.
It's not that common a practice actually, because what will happen is if you have bidders that might be willing to,
Go below.
yes, they're gonna go up to that point.
Yeah,
If
For-
you have lots of bidders, they're bidding, that could be one thing, but if your number is low, then I would tend to agree with you. If number of bidders, are gonna bid a lot more, and if it's a competitive bidding, it's a good practice to put a budget number, so you're gonna get lots of bids and they're gonna compete, but if your number of bidders is low, then you're gonna run into, if you put a budget number, then it's gonna be, you're not gonna get too many. You're not starting out with.
but so for the work that I'm doing with all the organizations and consultants that are BIPOC, that are, that's like one of the requirements, because if they can't, pay their team, if this, like the VSBA, the three
You can-
Bs, they
you
put
can
in,
have-
here's $40,000, $90,000, and we might pick 5 facilitators for this.
You
Like,
can-
so that's like some of the
You can,
considerations when in equity work.
yeah, but you can, if you look at state contracts, for example, a lot of state contracts, there are requirements that certain wage requirements are met, certain labor conditions are met. You don't put your budget out there for an undertaking necessarily.
So I heard Kristen ask the question, I think as a way of recommending that we do it. Amanda's recommending to do it. I saw Jim nodding. I'm just saying, like, maybe if
I
the
would-
consensus of the board is that we should do it, maybe we do it.
I would vote against this, so I would like to put it to a vote. I think it's a bad idea, but I don't think it serves our taxpayers. That's my thought.
Maybe we'll put in a
Would we
vote.
need to vote on a budget? Would that be something that we would need to vote on if we were to put it in there?
We have a line item in the budget. for
Which
it.
is probably public information.
Yeah.
That's one thing, that's another.
Hard to find.
If the board wants to do it,
I don't feel strongly either way.
I think
Yeah, I
it's,
don't feel strong either way.
I think,
feel
I just
strong.
don't think it yields.
Good results.
Yeah,
I think it's
I will
a
tend
bad
to agree with
practice.
Andy, I would tend to agree with Andy, but if it's public information, right, that information can be
Our budget.
accessed, then it may become an equity issue, is like some people be able to access it, and just because some others don't know, why are you hiding it? And so, in effect, then you might as well put it, because it is
Well,
available.
one thing, I guess on the equity front, if we wanted to ensure certain requirements were met, we could stipulate that in here if we really wanted to do that. I mean, you could just use a state contract as an example, because a lot of state contracts have like,
What? I can hear you, Andrew.
a lot of state contracts have certain wage requirements and labor requirements and environmental stewardship requirements in them. So like when RFPs go out at the state level, if we want to when you're talking about equity, what do you mean, I guess?
It's being able to access contracts like this. And so there's a whole conversation around what are the challenges for BIPOC consultants that are doing this work, that are doing really good work, and this is one of them. It's like that institutions are not transparent around funding. There's like this whole conversation, you can ask Susanna Davis, that is part of the conversation that's happening on this state.
It feels a little akin to me to the movement now to make sure that salary ranges are on job descriptions so that a candidate isn't guessing. So essentially, we're not hiring a staff person, but we are hiring a consultant. What we'd like to do is take out some of the guesswork. And I overlooked it in drafting the RFP.
I think a salary range for a job is different than this.
Yeah, it's not the exact
We can
same thing, but
disagree, but
it feels
yeah.
like in the same spirit.
Yeah, exactly.
We do still have Kristen on the line.
Yeah.
Did you have any other questions or feedback, Kristen?
Hi, I do. Sorry. So yeah, and mine wasn't necessarily a recommendation. It was a kind of a wonder and a curiosity, is if that's
Okay.
something that's standard. So I'm hearing the dialogue and it's a little bit broken up for me, but I'll have to come back and listen to the meeting. And then my second thought was just kind of acknowledging that we're still in a very fluid and dynamic public health situation with COVID, and just if it made sense to, you know, in a couple sections, maybe the, you know, successful proposals piece, that if you know, someone wanted to speak to, you know, a variety of strategies that might respond to the dynamic situation that we're still in. And then if it also made sense to include anything like in the terms and conditions, not knowing kind of how the next, you know, handful of months that are within the work schedule timeframe are going to pan out, and just if we want to name anything specific. I mean, ideally, I know that this process is happening, you know, a year later than, or we have 2 years later than hoped, and that it's timely and that it's needed. But if we wanted to build anything in that just would allow for some flexibility, because I know that we want to optimize this process, and that there could potentially be curveballs in the ways in which that we're able to engage with the community. So I was just thinking a little bit about that, and that's just fodder for us to consider.
The C took her.
The PA, the announcements over the PA system took her. I think I gathered there were two things she was thinking: that we'd like to see the people who are proposing include strategies for how they'll do engagement in the time of COVID safely. And then the second one I got was a little bit lost to me, that she was recommending
Yeah, well, let's just
Well,
make
the
sure.
or
fluid-
asking.
The fluid around COVID.
Yeah.
Like
Were they the
have
same
a
thing?
flexibility, I think so. No?
Well, we can send her an email and just make sure she has.
Yes.
Input. Yeah.
So we'll just set a deadline by this Friday to have final
Alright.
thoughts.
I'm just with this
Via
whole
email.
question about like adding the salary, the budget for it. I just quickly opened up the policy, our policy on budget execution, EO2, and there's an RFP section. I'm just wondering, I'm guessing you already looked at all that and made sure that we were in compliance of our own policy.
Just know that RFP is, that part of the policy is allowed to contractors.
There's just okay, so request for proposals, contract only, basically.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it's talking to.
Great, so Nia et al. By Friday.
Yep.
And then we can get this out and get this process moving, which is exciting. Libby, you're,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so this presentation was supposed to be SBAC scores. However, late last week, we got an email that says SBAC scores are still embargoed, so we can't share SBAC scores. We're not sure what's going on there. So most of this presentation is the exact same presentation that I gave to the entire faculty for in-service. Okay, so changed it a little bit for you all, but the slides are generally the same. So this was all the same information. So I'll start with, this is a piece that we're working on with our faculty around, it's not there yet. The board has a vision statement that's on our letterhead. And when that vision statement was made, it was discussed that the mission of the district gets charged to us. And so this is what the leadership team is playing with. It's our moral imperative to ensure that any child who graduates from MRPS has a limitless future. And it's our responsibility to build systems where student success is not determined by luck, willpower, family dynamics, or any other mitigating factor that's out of our control. So we're still mulling over how to make that sound a little better and less wordy. But the idea is any kid who graduates from us has any choice out there. They have the skills and the confidence to go out and get it. That's the main gist of what we're thinking about right now. I also shared with them over the summer, speaking with different MRPS parents. This was the sentiment that I heard from at least 5 of them this summer. It's almost like you're waiting for my kid to fail. And that's an accurate statement from those 5 parents and their perception. So I shared that with them, with our staff, and talked about, so this right here is the reason why we've been working on the systems we're working on, right? So this is now my 4th year as superintendent, our first year really focused on culture. Did we truly believe that all students will learn at high levels because of what we do every single day with them? Not what you all do at home with them, but what we do with them. So we worked on that quite a bit around what's a healthy culture and what's a toxic culture my first year. I did a lot of listening. I did a lot of watching, a lot of data analysis. And at about mid-year through that first year, we came up as a leadership team with the 4 pillars, which more veteran board members have seen as the red Venn diagram. So that red Venn diagram has kind of morphed a little bit into something a little slightly snazzier because I now have Anna. So this is it. It's the MRPS theory of growth with this idea that we want limitless futures. Jim has given the feedback already to make this less wordy. So I'm going to maybe call on you all to help me because this is like my world and I womp out on this. So it's hard to make it less wordy for me. So we have some ideas. The 4 big ideas that we're going to go into, the idea of collective responsibility and collaborative practices, formalized essential learning, timely system to enrich, intervene, and remediate, a high quality instruction in every single classroom. You've seen this before, you've just seen it in a different form in the red diagram as board members, because this is certainly not new. It's been around for, I'd say we named it about 2 years ago as like a public document, maybe 3 years. I don't know, with COVID, I keep losing track of where we are. So the idea is just quickly collective responsibility and collaborative practices, that what we do with children every day is incredibly complicated and no one person could possibly have all the knowledge they need to make it happen for kids. This is not an assembly line. And so in order to have that limitless future, in order to create that reality for kids, then we have to do it together and build on each other's unique strengths as educators. Formalized essential learning is the idea that we cannot possibly teach everything, that the Common Core alone, if we were to teach every single Common Core standard and ensure that students master every single one of the Common Core state standards in reading, writing, math, and listening, that they would need at least 22 years of schooling with us. We do not have that time. That's based on Marzano's research, who writes a book every other month, who's a big educational researcher. We don't have that kind of time. And so we need to prioritize what it is that we truly are saying every child will be proficient in by the end of their grade or content. So we're thinking about what's nice to know and what's essential to know in order to be successful when they move on, in order to build content knowledge that's imperative, that kind of thing. We're also thinking about timely system to enrich, intervene, and remediate. So every learner is unique. No 2 learners are the same. And some kids need more time with ideas. And so the traditional schooling method is that learning is the thing that's a variable and time is not. If I'm done teaching this, I'm moving on. We want to flip that around so that learning is no longer the variable. Learning of the essential skills, the essential learning that we're naming in that formalized fashion, is the thing that we will enrich in, will intervene in, and will remediate in if necessary. And I'll go into that a little bit later. High quality instruction in every classroom is that as a profession, there are certain practices that we know get good outcomes for kids. And there are certain strategies that we know don't. And so as a staff, we need to come together and name what does that mean, and that every single learner will have a teacher in front of them that knows what high quality instruction looks like for MRPS. So it takes the luck out of things. So Emma's kid, if Petra's in a different class than Mia's kid, they're still going to have same high quality instruction around the same formalized essential learning, that it's not different. So that's high quality instruction every classroom. We'll go into that a little bit. So these slides are evident of what is the work this year. Okay, so formalized essential learning for this school year, because this isn't the first time we're working on this, right? But for this school year, we've now named curriculum teams. Curriculum teams are a pretty common practice across districts. MRPS never had them before. So they're district-wide teams with a range of teachers from kindergarten to 12th grade on it. Those curriculum teams are naming the priority standards. So when we go into the Common Core, we're looking at which ones are the, or next gen, or whatever standards document that content area is. Which one of these are our priorities? Which one gives us longevity? Which one gives us staying power? Which ones are the ones that other standards build upon and kids have to know them? The curriculum teams will name those. They'll develop a proficiency scale for each of those priority standards. So right now, when you get a report card from different students, we don't use that as a data point for our district, because 2 first grade teachers might have different proficiency skills. They might be using different proficiency skills because we haven't formalized them. And when I say formalized, I mean written them down so you can access them as a parent. When we have this priority standard on a report card, you'll know here's the proficiency scale. So that too is not a thing that you're like, what's that mean? Right? It's going to be spelled out and named, which we do not have right now. And it's a big missing piece for a place that's celebrated for proficiency-based learning. That's missing from us right now. That team will be providing an index of assessment items that match the rigor of the proficiency scale. So when we say a student is a 3 in a priority standard, then we have assessment items that match what that rigor, what that 3 means. So kids are assessed not at what a teacher is guessing that proficiency means, but what we've named that proficiency to be. And forgive me, because I know there's a lot of educational jargon in here. So if I really say something that's really jargony, just call me out on it. And then this team will also communicate back to the teammates, get feedback on what they're doing, bring that back to the curriculum team and revise and work. So it's not one team making all the decisions, that all the teachers are involved. At the school level, we're participating. The admin is participating in different teams. We're giving time. And the admin, we're working really hard on knowing the why and the what. So we're all talking about the same thing when we say this. When we say priority standard, all of the administrators mean the same thing. And then at the district level, we're providing resources, a whole lot of time. Mike Berry's done a heck of a job organizing the learning that needs to come. If there's professional learning for these curriculum teams they need, the money, we're paying teachers stipends to do the work because it's after school hours. We're providing direction, we're monitoring them, and we're going to publicize them. So I'm starting to work on my own superintendent's newsletter or blog, and that blog will be split into these 4 areas. So the idea is each time I write it, that it will be celebrating work within these 4 areas, so to make them more public for the community. When we're thinking about collective responsibility and collaborative practices, I was trying to get to the teachers that just because we're saying that does not mean that we are all lockstep, right? And that we're all doing the same thing. That when we're really talking about what high quality performance is, it's when the performance is impactful and it's increasing. And I've asked the teachers to look at these 2 statements and think, which one of these statements are you really grabbing to right now? The research is incredibly clear by John Hattie, who has done meta-analysis, which a meta-analysis is looking at thousands upon thousands of studies to see what the effect size on learning is or on different practices. Schools that are here where teachers collectively say this statement have a much higher collective impact on learning than teachers who say, I know I can reach my kids, right? It's our kids. We all have responsibility for these kids. So we're really working on this piece right now. It's called collective efficacy. I'm sure you've all heard that term. So John Hattie's research says that it has a 1.5 effect size on student learning. So when you think about what that means, his research on these meta-analyses is that a 0.4 effect size roughly translate into 1 year of learning. It's a typical year of learning. A kid comes in the beginning of second grade, they learn 1 year of second grade work and they're ready for third grade. Does that make sense? So if a school is displaying collective efficacy, we can move all kids together, then those schools are showing a 1.57 effect size, which is 2.5 years of learning in 1 year. Yeah. So it's big. It's so that collaborative practices piece is enormous for us. It's actually the #1 influence on student learning. And I want to make it really clear with teachers that it's not sitting around and collaborating around where the next field trip is, the nice to know conversations. It's looking collaboratively about evidence and taking collective action on what the evidence is saying to us. So one of my main things I say to teachers all the time when I'm doing data days with them is that data is not condemnation, it's information. It's information for us to act on or not. We get to make those decisions, but a school that has strong collective efficacy takes that data, takes that evidence, and decides to take action collaboratively on it. Do you have a question?
Can you give an example about what a piece of evidence might look like and a kind of collective action someone might take?
Yeah.
A school
So
might take.
so a year ago, I have 3 what's called data days a year with guiding coalitions, which is the teacher leadership team in each building, in each of the buildings. And 2 years ago, virtually, the UES first grade team showed data that their first graders came into the year with not knowing all their letter sounds, right? That is a skill first graders should know when they come in. They shared that data openly in a very respectful way, as because they were talking about how they were going to collectively move them off the dime, right? The kindergarten teachers heard that information because they were in that too, in that data day team meeting. And they made a collective goal that would never happen again. And so this year, so then when we had the next data day, they were specific to show evidence that they had targeted that. They knew exactly which kids didn't have their letter sounds at that point, and they moved, the plan for moving them forward. That's the kind of thing we're talking about, right? They heard the information. They didn't say, oh, woe is me or those kids or whatever. They said, that's on us. We're going to talk about that and we're going to move on it. And last year was the very first year that I think there was in a board presentation that we had all first graders knowing every single one of their letter sounds, right? And that's the difference right there.
Yeah, that's a good example. Thanks.
Yeah. So what's happening this year with that? Remember, this is the work for this school year. It's in the professional learning communities. You'll often hear me refer to that as PLCs. So in their PLCs, they're answering these 4 questions. Every single time they are focusing in on one of these 4 questions. What is it we want all kids to know? So what's the professional learning community? So it's the grade 1 team talking about their next unit of study in math or their current unit of study in math. So that team will be talking about what is it that we want all kids to know in this unit? Those are the priority standards. Let's make sure we're all clear on that and we're all clear on what proficiency means. How do we know they will know it? So what's the common formative assessment we're all giving so that Jill's not giving a different assessment that could be easier than Mia's, right? That they're giving the same assessment on the priority standards. How do we know if they don't get it? So they're all analyzing the data together, right? And what do we do if they don't know it? So if Susan Koch's kids are knocking it out of the park and Linda Dosty's kids scored lower, Linda can say to Susan, what did you do to do that? So I can do it myself, or let's switch our kids all up because Susan really did a great job there. So she's going to take the kids who are still struggling with this. And Linda's going to take these kids, and so they're splitting it up. It's collective. And then what do we do if they already know it? right? It's the bane of my existence when kindergarten teachers are doing the letter of the day, not to say ours do. When my kid already knew all their letters, why are they sitting there talking about what an A looks like when they already know what an A looks like, right? So, and excuse all my primary examples, I was a primary teacher, so it's just easier for me to say primary examples than others. At the school level, we're ensuring that the PLC time is built into the schedule. It is not extra for teachers. That the principals are getting better at monitoring and coaching the PLC. So naming where they are in the PLC development, because our PLCs are all over the place, just like kids. And so they're naming where they are and then coaching them to move to the next level. And celebrate the learning that we don't do enough. When adults do really impactful behaviors on student learnings, we don't make that public enough. And we need to do that better. We need to celebrate it. And at the district, again, we want to ensure resources are available. We want to message that again through different means. We want to assist in continuing to create the common language, and we're coaching our administrators on how to coach their PLCs going forward. This is the biggie for us this year. Both the priority standard work and the PLCs we've been working on. In fact, we focused in on those particularly last year because we didn't have the time we normally did. So it was easier to prioritize, right? We said, you don't have time to teach the nice to know. You only have time to teach the priorities last year. So we did actually a lot of work there last year across our district, and they knew they had to work together in order to get it done. So we actually have a lot of really good momentum in those two areas from our last year and a half of what we've been through. This is the place that we know we need to move strongly in and quickly in. It's a place where when I started, we knew that we needed to move there. However, you have to have priority standards in place and you have to have a collaborative mindset before this means anything. So there is now, people may argue with me about this, but I can't hire tons of billions of interventionists if we don't know what we're supposed to be teaching, right? It doesn't matter. And so, so we needed to get those two pieces really moving forward before we focused on this. We have a good step up on those first two pieces now. So now it's time to say, we got to change this. It's not working, because we have people saying it's like you're waiting for my kid to fail, right? So this is the area for the next year or two. We're really laser-like focused in.
Can I ask you,
Yep.
how did the priority standards get this, like, what was the process to decide, like, we're gonna focus on this 5 or?
Yeah, there's a great book called Standard, I can't remember the title right now, but there's a process that the teachers will go through. So, and there's like kind of like a question and answer. Does it have longevity? Will it support next year's content? Does it matter in life? You know, so I'll give you an example. In the English language Common Core standards for, I believe it's like 9th grade, I want to say, maybe a little less, 7th grade. There's a reading Common Core standard around naming theme and being able to provide evidence from a text to get theme. Now, the idea of theme is critical for critical thinking, for problem solving, for everything, right? So that's a priority. There's also a standard that said compare movie and drama of the same story. That's nice to know, right? Like, that's not really, like, that's not a priority. A kid doesn't necessarily need to do that in order to think critically. They could do it as an activity, right? Does that make sense? So teachers are going through those standards and saying, which ones are the ones we're ensuring? And then they ask themselves the question, okay, we have this list of the standards. Do we have time to do all of these? Is it possible to get we're saying every single kid will be proficient in those? Is that a possibility, right? Or we're going to work our tushes off to get there. So then they have to ask those questions. It's a whole process that they're looking at there, but it's based on the work of Tammy Heffelbauer. If you want to write down that name, it's something like standardized. It's like standardized grading for school leaders, but if you want to borrow it, I have it on a bookshelf. I'm welcome to it.
And is it the teachers who have the final say on that, or do they have to get the approval of the principal?
Oh,
or
no,
do you
it's the
have to-
teacher. It's the teacher's work. It's not our work. It's the teacher's work.
Got it.
We're guiding the process,
Mhm.
but it's their work. They
Right.
have to own it. Okay, so this is a piece when we're thinking about I'm going to throw out some acronyms, RTI or MTSS. So RTI is response to intervention, which came out in the 80s, right? MTSS is Vermont's, doesn't matter, it's synonymous, is multi-tiered system of support. The two things mean the same thing, okay? And so when we're thinking about MTSS, what we do, we're really talking about timely system to enrich, intervene, and remediate. I argue as a leader that MTSS encompasses all of these four things, all of these four areas of growth, okay? But really when we're getting nitty gritty about it, we're talking about this. One of the things that schools in general, and I'm talking about the Royal schools, not MRPS in general, or specifically, did with RTI is that they never defined things clearly. They hired interventionists without any goal for what they were going to do. And kids who didn't get it the first time, the loudest teacher would say, take them from me, they don't get it. And then they'd go to a separate room and it doesn't work. It's not effective, okay?
This is what started in the 80s.
In the 80s. MRPS is not alone in the structure, the ineffective structures that are occurring now, and they are ineffective. We do not have evidence that they're working, right? So, so the first thing we need to do is define what it means and how do we use our limited human resources, right? So when we're talking about universal first instruction, this is what is happening in the classroom. This is what happens, what you would say is teaching, right? So when we're talking about universal first instruction, it's on the priority standards for our academic and social emotional behavior for the grade level or content area, if we're talking about high school and middle school, that the PLC teams, so the professional learning communities, determine what the shared formative and summative assessments. So formative is kind of like the doctor's checkup and the summative is like an autopsy. Okay, so that when you're alive and kicking, you're going to the checkups to make sure that's what formative assessment is. Summative means the unit has been taught and right, the unit has been taught and you're not really moving on that anymore with a whole class. On the priority standards, and the PLCs are also conducting data analysis. It's all the work of what the PLC was in those 4 questions. The instruction needs to be the first instruction, like instruction kids are getting in the classroom with who you would name as your kid's teacher, right? It's differentiated, it's based on a growth mindset, it's intentional. So when I walk in, I say, what are you working on? They should be able to name it for me, the kids and the teacher. It's goal-oriented and it's engaging to the students. Okay, that's what we're going for with that. And that 100% of our student population fall into this category. Every student has access to universal first instruction, okay? When we're talking about tier 2, this is where it starts getting fuzzy for people. Tier 2 and tier 3, if I were to ask most teachers across the US to differentiate the two, they wouldn't be able to do it, okay? So tier 2 is what we're talking about, prevention or intervention. It's still on the priority standards. So we want the person or the people who are most expert in the priority standards of that grade level to provide the prevention or intervention. And who is that? It's your grade level teachers, right? It's your kid's teacher. So it's still in that classroom. It's just good teaching. You do a formative assessment, you get your data, you reteach to the kids who need it, you enrich to the kids who don't, like, and you're going through this cycle. But it could include pre-teaching, it could include reteaching, it could include just more time, it could include some enrichment, but it's fluid and active within the classroom and it's based on the work of the PLC. Okay, so some examples might be at the high school level, they might be pre-teaching vocabulary. Oh crap. Yeah, it is. Yeah. We don't have an extension cord. So I'll just stand up.
Do you have a map? Is that a map?
No.
Should you plug in?
Oh, that's that one. Oh,
Oh.
okay. I don't have a cord for that, so
Have one.
no, it's not. That cord is in my room.
You've already did.
I have that.
You want me
That's
to
for you, isn't it?
Mia has a map.
Libby, is it open? I'll walk over and get it.
It's in my office.
No,
No,
but
I'm happy
none of
to
us
have
have maps. I'm impressed.
it's in my office. To see it on the floor. Okay, so let's see here. Some other examples are regrouping the kids, right? Around for different, Susan takes some, Linda takes some, that kind of idea. So that's prevention or intervention. That's just a reminder of what the priority standard is, right? So we're not giving prevention or intervention on everything. We're giving it on the priorities, right? So there still is some nice to know things, right? Like that, compare a movie and a drama. That we're not giving intervention on that though, if somebody doesn't get that. We would give intervention on a kid who's not understanding the theme. Make sense? And then we have tier 3, which is intensive remediation. It is not special education. It's intensive remediation. And it means that we're looking at multiple data points that a kid needs in a universal skill. So I'll give you an example of what a universal skill is. I was a 2nd grade teacher, right? So decoding multisyllabic words in 2nd grade is a 2nd grade standard. That's what we want 2nd graders to be working on. Multisyllabic words, like multisyllabic, right? However, letter ID is not a 2nd grade standard, right? Letter sounds or it's not a 2nd grade standard. If a kid comes in without those 2 things, that's a universal skill they need in order to be successful in 2nd grade standards, right? So they would need intensive remediation in that. The person who's going to give that intensive remediation is the person with the greatest expertise in that skill. So it's not an instructional assistant. It's, it's a person who has skill in that area. This is where interventionists come in, right? And so eventually we're working with a group called VCAT, which is a local Vermont group for an instructional plan in there that the parent's going to be a part of building and that the parent knows about. I was a parent where my kid was receiving some remediation. I didn't know about it until parent conferences when the teacher said, "Would you like to meet with me?" And I said, "Who are you?" Right? This is the place where we're not good at it. This is the place we need significant work on. Absolutely 100% without a doubt. And we have this year we're having an intervention team to really name what those universal skills are by grade level. So they're not teaching anything, but we're really naming what they're teaching, that we know how to write a really targeted focused goal. So the goals aren't the child will increase their comprehension. Comprehension is enormous. There are tons of different ways you could increase a child's comprehension. So we're going to name what it is that we're going to actually work on. We have a lot of work to do here. It is not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen probably in a year. But this is the place where when I hear parents say, "It's like you're waiting for my kid to fail," they have not been a part of this because we haven't been doing it well. That's what's happening there. And so when I hear that, I'm like, I thank you for telling me your story. In my head, it's thank you for telling me your story. Your story is helping me say, yes, this is what we need to work on, right? Because our schools weren't there yet. They weren't understanding what we needed to do yet. They're there now. That statement that I put up on the slide of "it's like you're waiting for my kids to fail," that hit home for our teachers. They care, right? And so I had so many come up to me and say, "Let's get to work on that," right? So there's some examples of that, but really it's a plan. It's intensive. It's a 3-week period of time. If a kid's mixing up their short E and short I sound, that is not 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. That's not what it means. You don't need that. You need 10 minutes for 3 days straight of jumping on lily pads that have short E, short I. Like you need really intensive focused work, and we're not good enough at that yet. So this is the place where we're really focusing in on building our understanding for what this means. And then high quality teaching in every classroom. This is big for our teachers. This is a quote that I really hold on to because we have some veteran teachers who are good teachers, right? But to suggest that the quality teaching could be improved is not to say that teaching is of poor quality. Our job as teachers is really complex and we can always get better. So you don't have to be bad to get better. And then this year, our teachers are working with Christian Quartermanch, they've been working with him for a while around math menu at the K-6 level. So it's differentiated math instruction. Teachers Development Group, that's what TGG stands for. Sorry, I didn't put these out there. This was just a slide for the teachers. That's for our 7-12 teachers in math around math practices and math behaviors. Teachers College Reading and Writing Project. We'll be focusing in on writing for our K-8 teachers. PLL is a Vermont firm who's working with the high school around disciplinary literacy. And then Core Collaborative is working with some belonging and inclusion work with us. And they're going to be making plans with colleagues to not just practice the work, but deliberately practice this work. I'm really focusing on this one idea that I'm going to practice as a teacher to get better at.
Did you say discipline literacy?
Disciplinary literacy.
So what is disciplinary
So
literacy?
it's the idea that literacy is not something on the plate, it is the plate. So it's like science, disciplinary. How do you read like a scientist? How do you read like a mathematician? How do you read like a social scientist? That all of those domains, if you're not literate in the domain, meaning how do you read that work, then you're not successful there.
I'm glad you asked. I thought it was like behavior.
Yeah, that's.
Oh, sorry. No,
The discipline
no,
of
discipline,
science.
yeah.
I was wondering
The
that too.
discipline of English. Got it.
Yeah. And then we have a lot of work to do in the background. So sometimes I say what's on the stage and what's behind the stage. And what's behind the stage is as a leadership team, we're really working on how do we build a common understanding of what we mean when we say best practice, right? What do we need? What are we looking for? And how do we give non-judgmental feedback so teachers are truly thinking about the choices they make in their classroom and their instruction? We're doing a lot of that work behind the scenes as a leadership team. And then thinking about how do we develop that strategy with our teachers to develop the teacher leadership and to build an understanding of an instructional framework, which we're using with the University of Washington called the 5D, so 5 dimensions of teaching. It's a great framework that if you want to see it, I'm happy to share the PDF around that with you. So that's this, when I'm talking about theory of growth, I know a lot of we've had questions around what is the work. This is what we're focused in on, these 4 areas. And I call it a theory, not a strategic plan, because it's evolving. And each of our buildings are in very different spots in these areas, in that it's my job to say, you are clearly working in 1 or 2 of these 4 areas, because that's about all we can handle. Name which one it is based on where your school is, and then we'll support you from the administrative level, but it's not, we're all locked up working on the same thing because not everybody's in the same spot. So I know Emma asked for the continuous improvement plans today. I just shared it with you in an email. And I can share it with, it's a dense document because it went to the AOE and has lots of links and all that kind of stuff, but I'm happy to share it. But in the continuous improvement plan, this is what it is. At the highest level, this is what it is. Any questions?
Is that something that you shared publicly, like that?
It's on our website now.
It is on the website.
Because I thought it was, and it wasn't. When
Okay,
you
I was
asked
like,
today-
where is this?
When you asked today, I thought it was on our website and then
Okay.
I was like trying to find it quickly and I couldn't, so we got it up next time.
So this is like a how many year plan do you envision like to get there, or you're like, we know exactly what we need to do, like?
Well, I know our steps that we need to take. Yes, there are definite like definitive steps that need to happen. However, I couldn't say we're going to be top notch in this many years because it's so evolving and we have such different schools in different places that one school could be nailing an idea. Like UES right now is really good on is really good in that collaborative practices and collective responsibility. They're awesome at it, right? But they don't have the MTSS piece. So that's going to take multiple years for them to get to, right? So we're, naming the priority standards. MHS has, like, their math team is really fantastic at naming the priority standards and they're developing the proficiency skills, but other content areas aren't there yet, right? So it's hard to name exactly how long. And that's the beauty of the theory, is that we should constantly be evolving and constantly be thinking, okay, we're here. How do we get here?
I will say I met with Mike Berry like a few years ago on some curriculum at the middle school. And so I know that were at it for years. And there's some great work being done and real palpable improvements being made that impact the students and their learning. So it's been great. I mean, also, I'll just speak from my experience that I think every school in Vermont, proficiency-based learning was a huge paradigm shift, and it's going to take time to get it right. And like the quote on the slide said, you can still be doing a good job, but there's always going to be improvement. And I think, the schools that I've taught at are along this same track. of identifying priority standards and all of that.
So for the parents that have come forward sharing about like their kids' current, like, I'm just like thinking, the kids now plus the kids in 5 years, it's gonna be very different because you have evolved the system. So what are the mitigation strategies for the kids now?
Yeah,
Like,
Yeah, so things that we're working on right now that we don't have, right? So one parent, I know you've heard, said, you don't have any special educators or interventionists who know multisensory teaching. Accurate, yep. So this year, we're getting, so with that ARP IDA money, we're pairing up with the Stern Center and we're getting our teachers trained in multisensory teaching, right? So that's gonna have an immediate impact on how instruction is handled in the classroom. We also have just the idea of an intervention team that we're clearly defining what they do. So it's not, you're not teaching everything, right? You're gonna have data in front of you that shows which kids you need to target and how you write those goals. That's gonna have an immediate impact, right? So when I was a curriculum director in Swanton, for instance, they really focused in on timely intervention. And within a year, they had completely changed their system and they had absolute success. And they had evidence of that success. It was amazing what they did. But they were laser-like focused in that. Now, we're still in a global pandemic. So will we be laser-like focused like that right now? I'm gonna say probably not. I'd like to be, but there are other stressors hitting our system too. So we just have to recognize that.
I mean, this was really so helpful to see the big picture and the granular way that you are. It's to me feels like a big mindset shift that you're working toward and practical application of it. And so I appreciate you sharing this with us. And I just had a couple of little follow-up questions, really. The curriculum teams, are they, so like if it's the curriculum team for the first grade, are those only first grade teachers on the curriculum team, or is it?
Teams are district-wide.
Oh, okay.
We ask teachers to apply for the teams. So we have grade level representation all the way up. And so it's like, it might be one first grade teacher and they'll make so it's vertically aligned, right? Because one of the things that we noticed right away with some things we did have done on paper, which was not a lot when we took over. That's why you see formalized. When you see the word formalized, it means it's on paper.
Gotta
that you
write
could
it down.
access it, right? So what we found was that either grade levels were repeating the same idea, even though it wasn't their standard, or they were just picking standards, whatever they felt like teaching, or, so that first grade representative will go back to their first grade team. And they'll say, this is what we did as a K-1-2 vertical align piece. What are your thoughts? And then bring it back. And then, so it's an iterative process.
And it's usually by subject, by content.
Yeah, so we have a literacy, we have a math, we have science.
So that makes a lot of sense. And the PLC, are those like the first graders are just first grade teachers?
Generally, yeah. It gets a little wonky at the high school. PLCs are tough when you have a small high school because you only have, you might have 2 teachers teaching Algebra 1, and they may not be teaching at the same time. Meaning,
wait, say that again? They'll both teach Algebra 1.
So we may have 2 math teachers at the high school who both teach Algebra 1.
Right.
However, one may teach it semester 1 and one may teach it semester 2.
Got it.
So they're not doing the work at the same time, which makes it a little more tricky. So the PLCs at the high school may not be by content or class. It may be by a math team or an algebra team or whatever that is.
Okay.
So it gets wonky and a little bit more tricky. And you also have singletons. We only have one Joe in Latin, right?
Right. He
So
is the PLC for Latin.
Well, now we have actually 0.2, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So it gets a little wonky when you're in a small high school.
Are there ways though, like, I realize it's not a modern language, Latin, is there like a language group that can come together for something like
So
that?
in middle school, it's our languages, right? So Biba and our new Spanish teacher, are one, and so they look at what are the commonalities that they both want to happen, whether it's like oral expression or whatever. And so Bibba will think about it in terms of French generally, and the new teacher will think about it in terms of Spanish. It's trickier, it's harder to do it that way, but yeah.
Thank you for sharing it with us. It's exciting to see.
Yeah, this is amazing. Do you think there are the ways like then when there's budget process to like take this and be like, this is how?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
like
the
for
last
the-
budget, I don't think you're a board member yet, but the very first board meeting, we had that December 1st or whatever budget presentation. What we did was we took each of these, what we called them pillars then, each of these pillars, and we said, here are the budget priorities that are aligned with these.
Oh.
So yeah, we aligned it that way. We'll probably do the same thing if the board like that.
That's great. That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you, Libby. This is fantastic. And what you're doing and
You can walk out.
Huh?
I can walk
Yeah,
out
it's
on
really
this.
nice
I
to
can
see you in
nerd
your
out on
natural
this.
habitat. It's
Yeah.
like, it's a beautiful thing.
I can nerd out on this for a while. Yeah.
That is clear.
Excellent. So we are rounding out the agenda, 2 policy monitoring reports to approve. G1 or GO4, Title I comparability, and GO5 animal dissection. Do I have a motion to approve the policy monitoring report for GO4 Title I comparability?
I have some questions, which I guess happens after the motion.
I needed 2 minutes because I didn't see it in the thing.
I did not rename it as policy monitoring.
It also had share permissions issues.
You were the only one that happened to though.
Really?
Oh, me too.
And
Yeah,
Amanda
I couldn't.
and Jim at the policy meeting today.
Yeah, I didn't-
On this one, should we just push this to next time because we're running late? We did.
Yeah,
have
that's
an
a good
agenda
idea.
item.
Okay.
That's my fault. I told you I'd make mistakes. That's why.
Yeah, that's a fine one to make. It's a fine one to make.
Yeah.
Animal dissection, it was not, it's not a huge one.
And I have to admit, I couldn't find animal dissection either. Did anyone else have that?
It just was, the permissions weren't set to be,
private.
for us to be able to open it. So when you went through the board packet, it just skipped it.
All right, so let's push both until next meeting.
So I think it's this one.
Sorry, my
I'm sorry.
fault.
No, no problem at all.
I think it's that one, but then.
You
when
had
I-
it in there.
When I tapped
Yeah,
it, it said you
Yeah,
get
it's
access.
thinking with that, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's in the middle of the slide.
Let's do a quick executive session to discuss the personnel matter.
Before we do that, I do have one question. There were 2 policies, those draft proposed changes. Do we, they were in the,
I think they were for the benefit of the finance committee.
Yeah.
So
Oh, thank
we're- they're gonna come before,
That's
we
right.
made a decision to bring them before the board next time so that board members have time to read them.
thank you.
Because otherwise we would have just voted, we would have just reviewed them. And there were, at least one of them, there were some changes to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
both.
then you wouldn't have had any time to read them, so.
Thank you.
Do they go back to the market?
Do they need 3 readings for changes or just?
They,
one? Okay.
they do
Next
need
time
3
we'll do a
readings for
reading.
changes. We can bring them back to the policy committee. This is pretty
Yeah, yeah.
boilerplate for the
Yeah.
most part. And the whole board reviews them, has to read it 3 times. It's
Yeah,
gonna
it
be
doesn't
on the board
have to
agenda
go through
3
the
times.
policy committee.
I mean, we would probably have time if you want to take a look at it. You
You-
know,
We could
'cause
send
we're
it,
meeting-
we could send it to the policy.
we're
committee
meeting on the
beforehand.
same day as the next school board meeting.
Might
so-
it,
No,
might
it's
as,
okay.
might as well send it.
But there
if you
will
want
be
it.
3 policies then.
Well, they'll be in the board packet. so
Yeah, I'll
the
put it in
policy
the board,
committee will.
yeah.
If we want to take it up that day, we can.
Yeah, the policy committee has any, yeah, we can bring any changes to the meeting.
Yeah.
if we've got
Yeah.
any.
Yeah.
That's right.
Do I have a motion to go into ES for personnel?
I moved to go into the executive session for personnel matter.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, we'll,
We'll move to
126.
Okay.